Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 stunning albums of non-standard repertoire on CAPRICCIO, a really interesting label. It began life as part of the Delta Music Group, if I recall correctly, and specialized in some early music things, which it still does. But particularly there was like a Boccherini edition and a CPE Bach edition and lots of regular Bach with some really first-class artists, some of them from Eastern Europe. And after that, they were acquired by Naxos, and they somehow got their fingers into Austrian radio productions and things like that, and the floodgates opened. All kinds of fascinating music, and particularly contemporary music, of a really wonderful variety. And I have a bunch of those here, both early and late, and we're going to go through them because this is just terrific stuff. You've seen that they've been specializing in the some of the concertos by Kapustin, which won a fabulous Keep On Listening Award, a COLA, last year. I mean, the award committee, that is me, decided that it was like the disc of the year, and yes, it was just fabulous. So they're doing great stuff, and I've been having a wonderful time talking to you about it, especially because I have permission to use sound clips. I mean, they're just really a sensible outfit. And they've been operating kind of under the radar. But since they joined Naxos, they have a lot more visibility, and particularly with distribution issues and whatnot. So let's go through these things. These are in no particular order, but roughly chronologically earlier to later. But then when we get to later, it's a grab bag because there's just so much stuff. It's just marvelous. So first, one of the great Baroque opera recordings out there, Hasse's Cleofide. Now, we all know who Cleofide was. She was the wife or the girlfriend of Porro. Remember Porro? There are a lot of Porro and Cleofide Baroque operas. The story's always the same. It doesn't make any difference. There's a love triangle. It's supposed to be tragic. It ends happily. It has a lot of da capo arias, but Hasse was the great Baroque opera composer on the continent. Sort of now we revere Handel, sort of most of all, but in the day, Hasse was the guy, and his wife, Faustina Bordoni, was his wife, and they were the power couple of Baroque opera. They just ran the show. She was the one, Faustina, who got into the big fight, the onstage battle in London that caused with Francesca Cuzzoni, that caused hysteria in England, and appalled and titillated everyone and made the papers and all that. She was no one to fool around with, but neither was her husband. And he wrote lovely music. He had an Italian nickname. He was known as like Il Sassone or something like that, the Saxon something, or that was Handel, or he was the Dresdener or the something or whatever. He was a big deal. He wrote hundreds of operas, hundreds, thousands. And Cleofide is one of the best, supposedly. I mean, that's what people say. No one's heard them all, so no one's really in a position to say much of anything, are they? But this is a hot performance. The cast is Emma Kirkby, Derek Lee Reagan, Agnès Mellon, Dominique Weiss, Randall Wong, and David Cordier or whatever his name is, with the Capella Coloniensis under William Christie. So this is serious stuff. But it was a 4 CD set. It was a WDR production, which is how CAPRICCIO probably got it, because it was German radio, and from Cologne. And my goodness, it's marvelous. It's long. It's 4 discs. It's a big, fat Baroque opera with fabulous singers. And this is like the kind of stuff CAPRICCIO does. So Cleofide is a big one. The list is down below, of course. Next, here's a 5-disc set dedicated to the music of Joseph Martin Kraus, the almost identically exact contemporary of Mozart. His dates were 1756 to 1792. Do you recognize those dates? Yeah. And he died quite young. He was basically running around Sweden for most of his career. And this disc gives you, let's see, his incidental music to Amphitryon, or however you want to pronounce that. Then a disc of cantatas, and 2 discs of symphonies, and a disc of chamber music containing a flute quartet, a string quartet, and another string quartet, 2 string quartets. This is really, really good stuff. He was a seriously fine and talented classical composer. And some of you have actually mentioned Kraus before. The symphonies particularly participate in some of that Haydn Sturm und Drang period stuff. There's one in C sharp minor, like a really strange key that's full of tension. And there's another one in C minor, and all the rest are all 2 of them in C minor. The Symphonie Funèbre in C minor, which is a big deal in the classical symphonic tradition. And they're all here in excellent performances. Let's see who's doing them all. Let's see, Concerto Köln and L'Arte del Mondo under Werner Ehrenhardt, and some sopranos and singers and the Schuppanzig Quartet and other very gifted people. So Joseph Martin Kraus, 5 discs, reasonably priced, these things. A great way to get to know the composer, it really is. It's just such a non-brainer. Then we jump to the 20th century. Basically, I think all this is 20th century. Yes, this is really cool. Capriccio has spent a good bit of time promoting the music of Ernest Block. Here's one of their discs of Ernest Block. Really, Block was a major composer. One of the great orchestral music composers of the first half of the 20th century. He's roundly ignored, except for Shlomo and some of the Jewish motive things that he did. But this disc has some of those. 2 psalms for soprano and orchestra with an orchestral prelude. A beautiful, beautiful work. Psalms 137 and 114, actually. Then the Suite hébraïque for viola and orchestra. Baal-Shem for violin and orchestra. And the 3 Jewish poems. That's a major work. That's a really big work. That's about 25 minutes of music and 3 sort of tone poems. They're lovely. So this is a Block Jewish Stuff album, and it's excellently done by Stephen Sloan and the Deutsches Symphony Orchestra Berlin with Christian Deitze, whatever her name is. She's a soprano. Tabia Zimmerman and Antje Weithaus. I think I didn't mangle those too badly. I mean, not only do you get obscure repertoire, you get difficult soloists with difficult to pronounce names, which I mangle and which you are not going to correct on pain of being permanently disbarred. So here we go. Ernest Block. Great stuff. Then Giuseppe Petrossi, the Italian sort of avant-gardist kind of. He started off more like in a Hindemith vein and then evolved a more and more dissonant and challenging idiom, shall we say. But his music is cool. I like his music very much. It's sort of motoric and energetic and full of energy. So here you've got his piano concerto and his Partita, and then his Toccata for piano and his Inventions for piano. So you get a nice range of stuff. And this was all composed in the 1930s, 1920s, 1940s. It's not his crazier idiom. So it's fairly listenable, and it's really wonderful. The central movement of the piano concerto was an arietta con variazione, which are quite interesting. It's a big piece, wonderful piece. The soloist is Pietro Massa with the Göttinger Symphony Orchestra under Christoph Matthias Müller in the first 2 pieces, the piano concerto and the partita. The other 2 are solo piano works. But it's a wonderful guy who participated in that neo-Baroque, neoclassical, Neue Sachlichkeit-like kind of 1920s and 30s idiom. Like the early Hindemith, like I said, that kind of stuff. It's really good. Really good and enterprising. So Petrassi is a major thing. And then, this is beautiful. Here's a wonderful, wonderful disc of Frank Martin's Requiem, which is a magnificent setting of the Requiem. It's for soloist, choir, orchestra, and organ. And he wrote it for himself, actually. It was at the very end of his life, along with Janáček's Our Father, Otse Nos, which is an entirely big sort of cantata prayer thing that he did. And it's for, tenor, chorus, organ, and harp. It's lovely. And this is all done with the ORF Choir and the ORF Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra under Leif Segerstam. So this is what happens when you have access to Austrian radio. You get cool repertoire of, really fine performances with major artists. So yeah, that's a nifty one. And then we have, Hans Eisler. Capriccio does a whole thing with all of these Eastern European guys, Paul Dessau, Hans Eisler, the guys who are working with Bertolt Brecht and that East German, sort of socialist, realist, but not always, kind of. It had its own kind of flavor. The Berlin cabaret scene and Kurt Weill and those people who were doing similar stuff. It's quite wonderful. And this gives you some film music by Eisler, which he reused. He reused all of this stuff in various points. And he spent a good bit of time in the United States, working in Hollywood, believe it or not, and doing, documentaries and other stuff. So here we have the music from Hangmen Also Die, an anti-Nazi propaganda film, which is really kind of nifty. And then the 400 Million, which is a film about the Cultural Revolution in China. And then his alternate film score for The Grapes of Wrath, the Steinbeck classic from 1941-42. And then he wrote atonal 12-tone works, his Kleine Sinfonia, his Little Symphony, and Hörfleischübung, whatever the heck that is. It's a Hörfleischübung. We don't need to translate that. It's a listening exercise of one kind or another. Those are from 1931 and 32, with the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra under Johannes Kalitzke. Really a fascinating disc of music by a very interesting composer. And we've got, why not? Morton Feldman. I love Morton Feldman. He's so cool. And two of his really nifty late orchestral works, Coptic Light. It's just sort of like a mobile with soft cluster sounds drifting in and out. And String Quartet and Orchestra, which, not surprisingly, is written for a string quartet and orchestra. You might be forgiven for thinking it sounds a bit like Coptic Light, in which it has very slow, very quiet, sort of chordal agglomerations drifting in and out in slow tempo. And there they are, quite marvelously performed by the Arditi Quartet, those contemporary music specialists with the ORF Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra, under Michael Boder and Emilia Pomarico. That's for the challenging. And, we'll jump back into the 18th century. Yeah, Capriccio is doing like the complete Hans Rott orchestral music. Now, Hans Rott is, one of those flash-in-the-pan composers who got some attention because his first symphony has some very startling pre-echoes of Mahler's first symphony. And Mahler acknowledged that. Mahler saw it and said, "Oh, wow, he sounds like me." And I thought that was rather fun. But that was after Mahler wrote his first symphony. He went insane when, he wanted to have his music produced in Vienna, and he went to Mahler, and Mahler turned him down, and then he got on a train, and he went crazy, and he said that Brahms was trying to blow up the train. I mean, he had a sad life. His dates were 1858 to 1884. So he only lived into his 20s, and 26, I guess. And he wrote this big symphony, which his proponents say is like, the bee's knees. I think it's an extremely iffy work. It has wonderful moments, especially the scherzo, which sounds an awful lot like the scherzo from Mahler's first. Not because Mahler was copying, because they were both drinking from the same well of Austrian landlerish folk tunes and things like that. And there are bits that sound a lot like Brahms' first. The whole thing is horribly out of balance. It has a 9-minute first movement, a 21-minute finale. It also sounds a bit like Bruckner in places, and a bit like the finale of Mahler's third in places. It sounds like everything Viennese that was sort of going on in that period, and all in a big undigested lump. Was he talented? Yeah, sorta. I mean, he could write a symphony. You need some talent to write that. He's a very, very minor figure, but it's interesting to hear this stuff. And you also get his incomplete symphony for string orchestra. You get 3 movements of it, and a symphonic movement in E major. This is what, volume 2. We've talked about volume 1. I believe I did a ClassicsToday.com review, and I might have done a video as well. I'm not impressed. Do not believe the cult people. They are full of nonsense as usual, and their blind adoration completely befuddles their sense of taste or musical form or anything else. But it's good to have this. It really is. Hans Rott was an interesting character in the period, and so now we know who he is, and we never have to pay attention to him again. Now, this is a really cool set, this one here. Now we're getting to something serious. The film music edition of Alfred Schnittke. 4 discs of music written in an absolutely insanely eclectic stylistic mélange. Yeah, Schnittke is interesting, and of course in his concert music we hear the same stylistic mélange of classical and popular, all kinds of stuff, all mixed up, coming together until his very late bleak, kind of more ethereal stuff. And it's just so much, I can't even tell you how many interesting pieces here. There's the waltz, the glass harmonica, the ascent, the story of an unknown actor, the commissar, the fairy tale of the wanderings, Rikki Tikki Tavi. Who knew? Schnittke did a Rikki Tikki Tavi. Sport, sport, sport. And finally, that classic, The Adventures of a Dentist. There you go. Did I ever tell you, there is a very, very famous dentist, a very famous, well-known dentist in New York City named David Hurwitz. I looked him up. He's on Central Park West. And everybody thinks I am he. And I get more junk mail about my dental practice. I wonder if he's getting it. I don't know. But his name is David Hurwitz. So hello, Dr. Hurwitz. I keep sending these things back saying I'm not a dentist. Well, here we go with Schnittke doing The Adventures of a Dentist, and I'm Dave Hurwitz, and I'm talking about a dentist. So now I'm going to get a whole host of more additional junk mail. But the Schnittke Film Music Edition is really a creative and interesting enterprise. So thank you, Capriccio. That is really, really fun. And last but not least, there's so much stuff on this label I could talk about, but I just pulled these out and, to see what would happen. And the cool thing about them is you could just pull anything out. It's like kind of interesting. This is really a fun disc too. This is a 3-disc set. Yeah. This is Prokofiev's incidental music, stuff that nobody knows that he wrote. And another very eclectic mixture of interesting repertoire. You get Hamlet, and he did incidental music to Boris Godunov. He did, yes. And Eugene Onegin, he did Eugene Onegin. Oh, wow. It's not Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, not by a long shot. And this is for speakers, chorus, and orchestra. And it has an opus number, opus 71. So it's a major work. It's a big work. And then finally, Egyptian Nights, the complete recording of the incidental music. What a wonderful supplement to any of you Prokofiev people out there. If you are thinking you knew your Prokofiev and you really had everything there was to have by Prokofiev, I'll bet you didn't have this, at least until you got it, if you know what I mean. I didn't know this stuff existed. I looked at this and went, well, what do you know? He did incidental music. Prokofiev. He did Boris Godunov. He did Eugene Onegin. Egyptian Nights, that's a suite. There's a suite, but this is the complete one. So there is some bits of that. But wow, what a wonderful, enterprising thing. And it's, again, the Radio Symphony Orchestra Berlin and the RAIS Kammerchor, Chamber Choir, under Mikhail Yurovsky, who was a wonderful conductor of this stuff. He did all kinds of Prokofiev ballets. Remember, he did that edition on CPO. So it's just great stuff. Fabulously recorded, marvelous. And there we have, hang on, here they are, all in a nice handy pile. 10 absolutely stunning albums of not standard repertoire on Capriccio. Just great stuff. A wonderful label worth exploring. Check out their website, or they're on the Naxos website. But just look at all the stuff they have. It's amazing. I have a great time talking about it. They've got a Walter Braunfels edition. They've been doing Dochnani stuff. It's wonderful. And Kapustin, of course. Just wonderful what's out there. So it's all there for us to enjoy. Keep on listening, my friends. Thank you for joining me. Take care.